Suarez.
Thanks, Yvette, for the introduction. It's really great to be here, and thank you to Sina and also Natalie for organizing this really great conference. I'm looking forward to the rest of the talks. Now, my name is Hannah. I'm external CISO, focusing on cloud security and also third-party supply chains for the telecommunications industry, marketing, and also in aviation airlines. But the story starts before, in 2016. 2016, I was working as secure file transfer admin in technical support. And what I've noticed during that time is the focus and the move away from on-premise to cloud. Now keep in mind, this was 2016. The year before, 2015, only 15% of company data is in the cloud. Now let's move on to 2018. I was technical evangelist for a logging and security events company. And again, it's also very interesting because there has been some new products and features on the market, which was all about cloud logging. And so there has been move away on-premise to more hybrid cloud models, to SaaS, and also pure public cloud. And this is where we're at right now. Trends in managing cloud-based risks. Let's take a look at it from the threat landscape perspective. The threat landscape is the entirety of potential and identified threats affecting a particular sector, group of users, and time, and so on. Let's take a look at it from the sector perspective, from different industries in my day-to-day. Software, airlines, aviation, telecommunications. In software, we have the use of shadow SaaS. What do I mean by shadow SaaS? Well, it's not just your intern using Zapier. It's also legit applications in your company. It could be Fred from IT talking to Karen from HR. She wants to use this SaaS application, but it hasn't gone through the relevant security requirements. Now, I've seen that. These contracts get signed. Nobody knows what the trust boundary is or the data flow model. And then what is interesting here is SaaS-based attacks and techniques. We'll go into that later. And again, for software, it's also the fact that you have different sources of data that needs to be analyzed. With airlines, it's a little bit different. With airlines, they are not really so innovative. Who here flew to Berlin? Nope, we're all in Berlin. Oh, someone here. Well, if you've had to book an airline ticket, it's really terrible, the GUI. They can't really innovate. They have to go through a third-party supplier, service provider to innovate. And you know what that brings in? Third-party supply chain risks. And another thing with airlines is that in addition to a large attack surface, it's also the fact that they are more focused on the business data side of things. For example, loyalty program data. And we'll get to that and how that relates to Caesars. For example, American Airlines, the loyalty program is worth $31.2 billion, and some people say that it's even worth more than the airline itself. Then let's move on to telecommunications. In telecommunications, we have this expanding threat surface due to really large digital transformation initiatives, move to cloud, AI automation, all those buzzwords, the press releases. And that is in addition to the coexisting threats and vulnerabilities in technologies that have existed in 10, 15 years. And that also makes it interesting here is that you also have regulated data. So it's not just confidential data, it's also things like subscriber data, content data, and so on. That's the situation right now. So here we have the SaaS attack techniques targeting risks of cloud in services, the fact that the increase in attack surface is targeting the data, and the other item that I haven't mentioned yet is the unclear shared responsibility. So that's also a people issue here. Now, let's take a look at what's happening in the news. Any SaaS-based attack recently in the news? Like I mentioned, Caesars, MGM, Okta even. So maybe you've heard of Okta in the news. Well, here what we have here is not just the fact that there are growing SaaS attacks, but also these techniques are being contextualized in the framework. I went to London, 44Con in London, 2 months ago. So if you went there as well, you may have heard of this project Push Security, which is based on the MITRE attack framework. What they have done is they've gone through the 10 tactics, and from the techniques, they've identified which of these are SaaS-based. It's a really interesting project. If you look up their GitHub repository, you can make a pull request, you can add in your own opinions, you can read what the case studies are, and so on. Another one is from the MITRE framework. So if you have used the MITRE attack framework, here they have the SaaS matrix. They have 11 different tactics. So from left to right, we have initial access, execution, persistence, privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access. There's 7 techniques in credential access. There's discovery, lateral movement, collection, exfiltration, and impact. What's interesting here is, yes, there's 7 techniques related to credential access. There's 1 technique called valid accounts, and it's appearing in a few different tactics here. In the end, you've got exfiltration, so exfiltration through web services and through alternative protocols. Then what's interesting also is you have collection. So collection, automated collection through information repositories. So there's a talk here which talks about going through the Git repositories later on, and also collection through cloud data storage objects. So that's the SaaS matrix. And how does it look like in the wild? For Okta, the attackers use the technique steal application access token, and from there they can pivot on to customers, customer data, customer instances. Then following on that is Cloudflare. So the SIR team Cloudflare thwarted the attempt, and here we have the technique, use alternative authentication material. And that was also the case with 1Password, where there was the attempt on the Okta instance for 1Password. And on the user side, we have 23andMe. If anyone here has read through the news from 23andMe, so you have the credential stuffing attack. That was from Push Security first diagram, where password breach information was used, which then led to more personal information. So in this case, it's through the DNA relatives application, where the technique app user directory lookup was used. Earlier on, I mentioned Caesars. So who here went to DEF CON Black Hat as well in August? Stayed in Caesars? MGM? Okay. What happened in Vegas didn't really stay in Vegas, because we all know what happened with MGM and Caesars. So who refused to pay ransom? MGM? Yes, that's correct. So they absorbed $100 million in operational costs. And who paid ransom? The other one, Caesars. How much did they pay? Around how much? In millions? 10? 5? About 50 million. They paid $50 million in ransom. And the new thing here is this SEC filing. So Caesars, they had to file, they had to do an SEC filing, and in it, which you can read online, the attackers had a copy of the loyalty program database. And we'll get on to sensitive data, but they had a copy of the program database. It was established in 1998. There's about 25 years of customer data on it, SSNs, confidential data, and so on. And it was worth like $1 billion in 2015. I don't know how much it costs now, but the next item here in terms of managing cloud-based risks is security of sensitive data. So what's the situation right now with sensitive data? More data is moving to the cloud. 75% of businesses have 40% of sensitive data stored in the cloud, and this is up by 26% in 2022. So we'll have more and more of this. In fact, Microsoft, I think there's someone here from Microsoft, they recently, 2 days ago, are moving about $25 billion of customer card transactions to their public Azure instance. So this is what's going on very recently as well. However, unfortunately, on average, 45% of sensitive data is encrypted. and that's from this year's report. So why are we talking about encryption in sensitive data? One of the items here is that usually when we are talking about protecting confidentiality and integrity, it's usually through looking at what is encrypted at rest and what is encrypted in transit. But what about encryption of data in use? I recently downloaded the SOC 2 Type 2 report. It was OpenAI's ChatGPT Enterprise Edition. So I had to look at, okay, so what statements are they making about encryption here? So they have encryption of data in transit, at rest, but it didn't find information about what the encryption of data is like in use. So this is where we're at. So unclear shared responsibility. So it's finding out, for example, what's the situation is like for encryption of data in use in transit. Another item here in terms of managing cloud-based risks is that responsibilities are unclear. What do I mean by that? We know that some responsibilities, like when you're using Zapier or AWS, that some of it is covered by the cloud provider, which is at the top. Some of the security requirements are covered by the service as a service provider, application as a service provider, and then others are covered by the cloud customer. So it's things like, it's the contract owner, for example. It's, Fred from IT, and he's deciding to use this application without going through the security requirements. And then there's also the cloud operator. So the cloud operator is, the cloud integrator. In some cases, it's the same entity or the same department, but in major projects, the cloud operator is, a third-party MSSP, for example. So in this case, when the cloud customer is making a purchase, say, of a new, something as a service, it's not known or it's not clear that the cloud operator or the cloud integrator have security requirements that they need to meet. And then there's the cloud user, which is us. So it's like you, it's me, and usually this entity, this character appears in breach news, for example. Like, it's completely your fault that you've reused this password all over again. That's where they appear. That's when they put the responsibility onto the cloud user without going down the upper levels to the cloud provider who is responsible for that, the services, as a service provider, cloud customer, and also the cloud operator. Now, let's get on to the personas. So how can we, as an industry, work to manage these cloud-based risks? So we've got blue, red, and then compliance. Okay. What does this look like from the blue team? Well, in the blue team, they would perhaps want to implement or enforce confidential computing. I'll do a quick primer of what is confidential computing. One of the talks later on today, which is at, I think, 5 p.m., it's a little bit more about confidential computing, which is the Tesla talk. So it's a lot more in-depth and technical. So it's about unauthorized entities cannot view data while it is in use. For integrity, so it has to meet 3 minimum properties. So the second one is data integrity. So unauthorized entities cannot remove, alter, or add data while it is in use in the TEE. And then for code integrity, it's where unauthorized entities cannot add, remove, or alter code executing in the TEE. And what I mean by unauthorized entities is not just attackers, it's also the cloud service provider, the SaaS provider as well. And also a little bit more detail about what we mean by the trust boundaries. So we have here just the source there if you want to see, but we have at the top layer a scenario without confidential computing. So you see all of the elements here that has potential to access confidential data. Then we move down to just VM isolation, and then moving down to application or process isolation, then library and functional isolation. So we have different scenarios for confidential computing. And for blue team, what they can do is, for example, at the top, to adjust the threat model and also making sure to maintain the cloud security posture. And also to enforce security requirements, so that's things like knowing who is responsible for what in the cloud stack, so from cloud provider to cloud customer, cloud user, and so on. And then that's also enforcing data protection requirements, which then brings us to data sovereignty, so enforcing data sovereignty. So it's things like ensuring that the encryption keys are independent from the CSP or from the application itself, and also to build on or to assess on TEE, on confidential computing. Now from red team side, so has anyone here done or commissioned or analyzed a pen test or penetration test for software as a service? You did? Okay. I'm not a pen tester, but I'm mainly in the commission and analysis side. But what I've noticed from pen tests in the reports that I've seen with the software as a service is that it should be useful to know what is in scope. So usually you have the white box methodology that's mentioned in the report, but it's useful to know what CSPs is in use, what configurations are in use. The other item is to retain data structure. So we know that test data have to be used, but the question that I have is whether or not this data structure is retained. And another one that I really like from the reports is to see what is the attack complexity of this. So in this case, for example, you have the user report where you have the findings, the CVSS scores, how it was found, maybe even the mitigation and so on. But the attack complexity is something like an add-on from some of the reports that I've analyzed and also seen. Another one that would be interesting to see is how it looks like with the MITRE attack matrix, especially with the SaaS-based attacks. So it would be interesting to see, oops, sorry, accidentally. It would be interesting to see how it works when you add in, the MITRE attack framework here. So in this way, I, as the one that is reading and analyzing this, it's useful to be able to move it forwards, to move the report findings forwards to the IT owner, to the business owner, to the contract owner, so that they can make sense of it. So it is not just a CVSS score. So I can make a story out of it as well. And also just a little primer about attacking confidential computing. There's a lot more later on today with the Tesla talk here. Yes. Just a quick one. So software attacks, cryptographic attacks, supply chain attacks. So that's about abusing the supply chain of the trusted execution environment. Basic physical attacks. In this case, for example, I was reading a report by the NCC, and the NCC worked with the AWS to do a third-party attestation of the AWS Nitro API keys. And from that finding, they've only just made a note that, yes, it's under basic, the risk here is just basic physical attacks, which is very interesting. And then protocol attacks are protocols involved with the attestation of the TEE. Compliance and audit. So what's the situation like now with compliance and audit, and how can compliance and audit teams work? Well, if you've participated in a third-party security audit, or if you've had to implement it, you may know that you have to involve the red team, blue team for it. And in this case, one of the ways here is that the SaaS, in this way, there are unique challenges related to SaaS attacks, and the way to do it is to change the risk management approaches. So things like knowing what the responsibilities are across the stack, so from the cloud provider, the cloud service provider, the cloud customer, the cloud integrator as well. So you're being able to explicitly define who is responsible for what. And then the next one is to seek out or to upgrade attestations. So previously I've mentioned that there's the NCC and AWS attestation report. There's also other ones like the CSA, Cloud Security Alliance, psych assessments, ISO certificates as well, SOC 2 Type 2. The current state with compliance is that you have the BSI, the Bundesamt für Sicherheit in Informationstechnik. So you have the C5 controls here. And by finding out which of the data center has the C5 attestation, you know that it not only does it meet the basic requirements, but also requirements above it. So not all data centers, say in AWS, has C5 attestation, like Frankfurt, Paris, Stockholm only has it, and edge locations around Germany. And then in the ISO standards, you have some specific standards around cloud services, like the 27001, 27018, and then 27036, which is more to do with cloud, with supply chains. There are some upgrades with the ISO standards so that you can enforce and managing cloud-based risks. For example, in the 2022 upgrade, there's 2 new controls for managing ICT. So it's not necessarily actually with cloud, but it's just the ICT supply chain now has this involved. And then there's also information security for use of cloud services. So you may already be assessing cloud services, but in this case, they're actually wanting to explicitly get more information from the organization that has to be certified to this ISO standards. And then there's also this growing importance to secure sensitive data. So there's 3 new controls around it: data leakage prevention, data masking, and also security of personally of PII. Yeah. That's where we are right now. It's currently there are major initiatives to move to cloud, to move to hybrid, move away from on-premise. About 44% of IT decision makers, they are focusing on cloud data storage. And in information security, the thing here is that with the decisions that are being made, only something like 20% or 30% would have a security way. So they would maybe prioritize the ability to move to market. Maybe they could prioritize usability, but in these cases, they're not really prioritizing security. So in this way, we can try to move it forward so that these decision makers are able to make the more secure decision. And I've read that in 2025, we're looking at about 185 to 200 zettabytes of data. So we have more and more sensitive data to protect and to manage these risks. Thank you.